Get to know your LCSO. Information flows as learn and grow. With every episode we gotta know. Oh yeah, LCSO, let's go.
Hi, I'm Sheriff Mike Chapman. I want to welcome you to another podcast episode of Getting to Know Your LCSO. Today, we're joined by Sergeant Sean Plummer. Sean's been with us for, how many years now, Sean? 10 years, okay, so over a decade, and we're happy to have him here. We're going to talk a little bit about his role here in the crisis intervention training, and fortunately, we had an opportunity to talk to my wife here in my very first podcast. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that or not, but that was sort of the inception of this whole idea of trying to de-escalate situations and helping people out so that things don't get out of control. And we found, I actually got some very good feedback on that. Aside from my family, we got some pretty good feedback on that. So anyway, very happy to have you here. But before we get into that, I always like to know a little bit about people that we're talking to here, why they got involved in law enforcement, what motivated them to come to the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, and what your career has been so far. So just a little bit about your background, I think, would be helpful. So tell us about yourself,
Yeah,
Sean.
absolutely. Thank you for having me here, Sheriff. I'd say my getting into law enforcement is a little unorthodox. I wasn't the kid that dressed up as a law enforcement officer for Halloween. I wasn't surrounded by first responders in my family. And it wasn't until 3 months before graduating undergrad from the College of William & Mary that an old friend of mine who I went to middle and high school with, originally from Loudoun County like myself, reached out to me and said, "Hey, you ever thought about being a law enforcement officer?" And I said, "No, I haven't. What's it about?" So he tells me all about it, and I apply. And 3 months later, I was starting the academy here with the sheriff's office, and ended up, it's been 10 years now, and a lot of it, my motivation to join law enforcement at the time, although it was so quickly before I joined, was the fact that in my senior year at William & Mary, I took my capstone class was on the death penalty. And two of the things that it focused on, two topics within the death penalty in the United States, was both race relations and mental illness.
Okay.
And at the time, getting into law enforcement, I thought checked both of those boxes because they're heavily intertwined.
Sure.
So here I am 10 years later with no regrets about the path I chose.
Now, was your influence, was it somebody that was from here? Did you apply to other agencies?
I did. I did apply to other agencies, Fairfax, Prince William. What a lot of the folks do is apply to the big ones here in Northern Virginia. Loudoun, I just had that soft spot for because I was pretty much here from birth until age 12.
Okay.
So I was coming back to my roots. Looked a lot different at the time when I came back, but I just came back to where I was from.
Well, we're happy to have you here. And I'll tell you, and this county has grown like crazy. I mean, since I've been sheriff, I think it's grown probably 125, 150,000 people. So it really is moving at warp speed here. So, and what's good about that is, not only the serving the population that we do, and it's just such a diverse, integrated population, but to be able to adapt to and understand the people that you're serving out here and what they're looking for, and how law enforcement has changed over time. And I know from when I started my career many, many years ago, it's gone like crazy. I think when I first went out, when I was first on the road, I had a baton, I had a gun, and I had a set of handcuffs, and that was it. And I look at all the things now that people carry on their vests, and you got pepper spray, and you got tasers, and you got tourniquets, and you got all this other kind of stuff, and all the different training and how far law enforcement has come over the years in addressing the concerns of our citizens here and why that's so important. And I would say that we do a pretty good job here in Loudoun County. We always have a citizen satisfaction rating of about 85%. And one of the things I noticed when I came on, and we're going to talk about crisis intervention here, was the it was a tough sell when I first came on, because people were not used to that, and we were kind of like ahead of the curve on that. And what I saw was the importance of de-escalating situations. And I throw this stat out because it was really kind of interesting to me when we started our program in 2013. I'd asked for, or after about 5 years, I asked for like an assessment on the amount of times that we had to use force tasers in order to take people into custody. And in 2013, just as people were getting started on the program, we used it that year 44 times to take people into custody. The next year, as more people got trained, it went down to 17, then it went down to 11, then it went down to 7. And now we hardly ever use our tasers at all, usually about 3 or 4 times a year, because we know that there are situations out there that you're going to have to, that there's not an opportunity to, or there's not a willingness of people to actually settle down. Sometimes they're violent. We've got to use force. But you have then picked up the mantle here really for like the past 8 years in some capacity or another, and have been in charge of our program for at least the last 4 or 5 years. Um, so I think that's wonderful, and I look and I still look at the statistics, and we constantly see how well as an agency we do in de-escalation and the lack of having to use force. We do, of course, when we have to, but the amount of times that we're able to use our ability to communicate as opposed to having to do that is just it's just really off the charts, you know. So tell us about when you started into the program, what you saw initially, what your feelings are, where it's gone, and how it's evolved into like, because now we're going to talk about co-responders and we're going to talk about all these things that have developed since that time. So take us through from when you first got involved in the program to where you see it now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started with the program about 2 years after I got out of the academy. Already had that underlying passion for mental illness. So I took the class, I think, in my first year as a solo cop with the sheriff's office, and I loved it. I loved the aspect of maybe teaching. I love the aspect of the role play scenarios and the reality-based training aspect. And so I started as just a regular instructor, and you did that for a couple years, and then worked my way into eventually taking over the program as I have now. And just the way that I've seen just the cultural differences in terms of when I first joined, there was still, as you talked about, a little bit of hesitation towards having this mental health training, and it's a
Right.
week-long class. Wow, like for a lot of folks, it's why do we need
Right.
all this training?
Right.
And then all you have to do is look at studies that show that 1 in 5 law enforcement calls involve some semblance of mental illness.
Right.
And if you look at the time spent on these calls, it's 50%. Some studies show up to 50% of a given officer's time on the job, on duty, is spent
Wow.
interacting with individuals with a mental health diagnosis or just being in crisis. Doesn't have to
Right,
be a
right.
diagnosis.
Sure.
And so it's obvious why the training is needed. I've always said 40 hours isn't enough. 40
Right.
weeks would be good. We should all be getting, little clinical degrees based on how much
Yeah.
interaction we have as law enforcement officers. We are the Swiss Army knife sometimes, the
Right.
Mr. and Mrs. Fix It All
Right.
for society. So given that we respond to mental illness and mental health crises day in and day out, the more training, the better. And so what I've seen is going from to where when I started in 2018, CIT was sort of the only mental health training
All right.
that was around at the time. And now
Right.
we've evolved to where it's mandated for most departments, including the sheriff's office in our region. And there's constantly more and more classes out there for mental health.
Right.
So we're realizing as first responders in general, not just law enforcement, first responders as a whole, that we're going to continue to be responding to folks in mental health crises for as long as time is. So the more tools that we can get and the more understanding we can get for different things, whether it be bipolar, schizophrenia, intellectual and developmental disabilities, anything like that, it just better equips us to be ready.
Well, I know one of the programs that we initiated, fairly recently is the Blue Envelope program. So can you tell us about that? Because I mean, that gets into the people that we might not normally think are going through a mental health crisis, but just because of their backgrounds and their intellectual disabilities.
Yeah, I mean, communication is the crux of all of this. And it's one of the biggest things within law enforcement of preventing use of force and getting good outcomes for both law enforcement and the community is being good communicators for both parties. And the Blue Envelope is a specific program that helps individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, as well as other mental health diagnoses. If you have some sort of communication challenges for whatever reason, we, with the sheriff's office for free at any of our stations, you can pick up a blue envelope.
Right.
And in that envelope, we encourage people to keep their driver's license, their vehicle registration, their insurance information. And then on the envelope itself is just cues and tips and tricks for how to interact with that person. And it's so we don't have a miscommunication where we pull a car over and we think they might be intoxicated, but it turns out they're just nervous.
Right.
Or we think they're being defiant, and it turns out that they have something going on with their brain chemistry or with a mental health diagnosis that causes it to appear as defiance or appear as intoxication. So rather than putting the pressure on the person who already has a communication difficulty to verbalize to this stranger, this law enforcement officer, why they're acting the way they are, have it on a piece of paper. So when you're in that time of crisis, which any traffic stop is, you get pulled over, you're going to be in crisis.
Sure.
is hand them that envelope. And so all of our deputies have been trained in recognizing them. I mean, they're hard to miss. It's like a baby blue big envelope.
Right.
Open it up. You have all their identification that you need for the stop itself, and then you have all these other things that will tell you about that individual and maybe some things to avoid, some things to do. So it's a fantastic way of bridging that gap and just streamlining communication between strangers, which is law enforcement officers and members of the community on a daily basis.
And it might be somebody like suffers from Asperger's syndrome or something like that, where they don't really kind of pick up on the cues, or they look like they are being defiant in a particular situation when in fact it's not that at all. Yeah. So no, that's a great program, and I'm glad we were able to kind of kick that off. Now, one of the things you mentioned before was the amount of time that we spend on this. Now, I know that several years ago we initiated what's called a CTAC, Crisis Intervention Threat Assessment Center, or something like that, and we started that like probably over a decade ago, and what we wanted to do was to try to take that burden off of our patrol deputies, who would have to take somebody like on an emergency custody order or on emergency custody to the hospital, and then have to sit with them until they were actually placed in a mental health facility or released, one of the two. And that can take sometimes 24, 48 hours, maybe even longer. And somebody would have to sit there. So we designed this program, which was called the CTAC, and a facility. But the problem was the medical aspect is required, and we couldn't get that accomplished there. So can you talk about where we are with the, because I know we're now moving towards stabilization centers, can you talk about the difference between what we had, and I know what happened, we had a difficulty in just transitioning. In other words, where you could, if you took somebody into custody that was suffering a mental health crisis, you could take them to the CTAC, drop them off and get back in service. But then we had to realize that you had to get a medical evaluation, which the CTAC could not do. And I think now what we're looking at is stabilization centers. And it's taken a while to migrate to this, and how that factors in, and how. And then after that we'll get into the co-responder model. But can you tell us a little bit about where you see the stabilization center going, and what your thoughts are on that?
Yes, absolutely. So the Crisis Intervention Team Assessment Center, CTAC for short, has been around for probably as long as I've been here, so around a decade. And yeah, it was created as an alternative to taking people to the hospital and having patrol officers sit with them for, as you said, 24, 48, 72 hours. So have them in a more therapeutic setting where there's mental health professionals, and it's not the chaos of an emergency room. Emergency rooms are designed for, heart attacks, crashes, severe injuries. It's not the place for someone who is in a mental health crisis unless it's an acute. There are some mental health crises, the acute mental health crises, where there might be sedation, medication, things of that nature needed, but that's maybe 5%. So for 95% of people that need some sort of mental health assistance or evaluation, the hospital's not the place for them. It's not a therapeutic setting. And so having the CTAC as this alternative of, hey, there's actually couches here, and it's not a hospital bed. There's not screaming people, fluorescent lights, and all this and that. But as you said, as time went on, we realized, well, a lot of these state institutions to take people to after their initial emergency custody order for the temporary detention order require some level of medical clearance. And it's hard to pop up a medical clearance aspect at the CTAC. So thankfully, the state overall, and a lot of this has to do, bleeds in with co-responder as well, is emphasizing these crisis receiving centers. So for those who aren't familiar, that is hopefully opening up next month. Building's already up. It's fully furnished. It is just waiting on people to come in, waiting to finish up some licensing and whatnot with the state. But it is a completely therapeutic setting. It will ideally replace the hospital systems in terms of taking folks who are in those crises that don't need high levels of medical intervention. So they don't need doctors around the clock. They don't need stitches, surgery, brain scans, things of that nature. They just need a mental health professional to talk to, peer recovery specialist to talk to. There is medication there as well. Our crisis receiving center will have the ability for folks to come for up to 23 hours in what they call the recliners, really actually comfortable recliners for folks to get some care in. If they need further care, more than 23 hours, they can stay for up to 5 days in another wing of the crisis center. And then it's also going to have a third wing that they're referring to as the urgent care, which is more of, instead of going to an urgent care, like I know of an urgent care and other urgent cares that are throughout the county, if it's purely a mental health crisis going on, you can go there.
Oh, that's great. That's really, I mean, we've come such a long way that. And one of the other issues that we had certainly is that evolved into a co-responder. And one of the things that we experimented with, and I know this was several years ago, during summertime, we have school resource officers that were, we assign them to different things, but we experimented with this, which was kind of a prelude to the co-responder model to see how it worked here. And one of the things that we stressed was to have, in any kind of these mental health crisis situations, is to have somebody show up, not only just a deputy in a uniform, but somebody in a softer version of a uniform, kind of like this, maybe a green shirt as opposed to, the black or whatever, something that was a softer color, and that when they showed up, they could actually work, not only de-escalating the situation, but then act as a conduit for follow-up. Because a lot of times we resolve these situations, or you do this in any other location, you resolve it. You might do a referral and say, okay, this is where you got to go next. But to actually have somebody that could then come back and check on that person and say, hey, look, we knew, we were here like last week, and when you had a little problem here, we wanted to see if you were conducting any kind of follow up. Is there anything that we can do to help you out? So. And I know that was sort of a prelude to the co-responder model, and that was something that was initiated statewide. Mm-hmm. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you saw, when we tried that experiment, and then also how it's evolved into the co-responder model. That's actually facilitated by the state.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the average law enforcement officer in America is not a mental health professional.
Right.
There's no clinical degrees required. I personally took Psych 101 and 102 in college, but that's probably more than the average law enforcement officer. Right. But we are the ones that are sent to these calls time and time again. As I said earlier, 1 in 5 calls, 50% of our time. And so having an alternative to that, to where a specialized unit within a police department, within the sheriff's office, to go to these calls. And as you said, one of the biggest things with that is the follow-ups and the outreach that are outside of that. Because the way that law enforcement has been operating for decades is responding in the middle of the crisis.
Right.
So the crisis has hit a breaking point, and now law enforcement is being called, and then we leave, we put the Band-Aid on it, resolve it as best we can at the time, leave, and then eventually we might have to come back. Could be 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 weeks. And there isn't as much there historically within law enforcement follow-up when it comes to these mental health cases. We regularly do follow-up for criminal cases. That's in our DNA for decades, right?
Sure.
But follow-up for mental health cases has not been part of just law enforcement culture and law enforcement DNA. Right. So us, a few years ago, jumping into that with the school resource officers was a phenomenal first step in showing that we can have this wraparound care. And it's not just catch and release with folks who are in crisis. It's let's continue to connect you with resources, and make sure that it's not only in crisis situations where you're having to interact with folks who can help.
Yeah, and one of the things, and because when we interview people for promotion and stuff like that, we actually get some pretty good ideas. And one of them was like, instead of handing out like a bunch of brochures and stuff like that, to just put all the stuff like on a QR code.
Right. Yeah.
So. I mean, we're always trying to keep up. I mean, we got drones as first responders. We're doing all kinds of, whiz-bang stuff. Mm-hmm. I think, people kid me about using that term from decades ago. But honestly, I think about all the things that we're doing to try to stay ahead of the power curve here. And I think we've done a pretty good job as an agency to do that. And where do you see, like when we're doing these things, I don't know where we stand in comparison to other agencies, but I can tell you from, my connections with national sheriffs and major county sheriffs and different organizations that I see, I think we're doing pretty good. I think we're ahead of most agencies in doing this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, especially when it comes to the mental health stuff. CIT, we were one of the first programs in the state to get jump started. Same co-responder. We were one of the first ones as well. We were ahead of the curve in terms of we were not required to meet with the state mandates till, I think, honestly, we're still not required to until 2027 or 2028. And 2024, our co-responder team launched. And so we were ahead of the curve in terms of the state requirements. We've been ahead of the curve with a lot of this. And so our co-responder model, the only thing that I would say is to get us up there with, as best we can be, is just expanding. Expanding the hours. Right now, it's just 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. but expanding that to, the ideal and what we're seeing as the norm and the kind of best practice is a 16 hours a day, 7 days a week sort of thing. We'd love to be 24/7, 365.
Right.
That'd be perfect, but that's obviously takes a lot of staffing, a lot of funding. But in the pretty near future, we're very hopeful that we'll be able to go to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Well, that's good, and we're doing it so that's great that we've come that far. And then I look at just our training here. So since we started this program, I think we're like in the 60s as far as classes that we've run. And how many classes? I thought it was like 67. I'm not sure.
I think the last one was 67 back in May.
That's amazing. Okay, and how many people have gone through, and what backgrounds do these people that have gone through our CIT training? What are the backgrounds?
Yeah, we're at least in terms of the basic 40-hour classes, we're well over 1,300 that have been trained, and advanced classes, we're well over 250 that have been trained. We've had about 16 classes of the advanced. And I mean, we cover everything from, it started sort of CIT itself started as just for patrol officers. When it started in Memphis in the 80s, it was just for patrol. The training aspect was. And then they said, oh, wait, we should probably give this to courts and corrections as well. And then they realized, wait, we should probably also give this to, firefighters, medics, EMTs, anyone who interacts with people who are in crisis. You don't have to be someone who's interacting with people only with mental health diagnoses. At the end of the day, it's just individuals in crisis. And so since then, we've expanded to, we routinely have, not just fire and rescue and LCSO, Leesburg Police, Purcellville Police. We have community corrections coming through. We've had federal agencies. A lot of alphabet soup from federal agencies have come through our programs. We've had law enforcement officers. Some of the most eye-opening experiences I've had is recently we had a law enforcement officer, a whole team actually come from Jefferson County, West Virginia, and come through our basic class. And we've also had a few folks from Maryland, and just seeing how different states handle individuals in mental health crisis and being able to just be in the same room with someone and share ideas and sort of have these eye-opening experiences of being like, we're Loudoun County, we border West Virginia, we border Maryland. And then you talk to some of these folks and you're like, you guys are doing what? You do it that way? And we all do things differently. Well, same goal, same end mission, but it's just sometimes we're doing it differently. But yeah, we've had so many different folks come through our classes.
Wow. Yeah, and we've even had private sector companies, I think. Yeah.
Yes. And a lot of community partners have come through. Just if you're in a job where you interact regularly with the public, and a job where you might be dealing with individuals in crisis, CIT is a fantastic program. And then if you're not someone who does that regularly, but you still want to sort of, hey, I still interact with people sometimes that are in crisis. That's why recently, 2 years ago, we started the de-escalation program for the public. So that's under our crime prevention wing. So now I've gone to probably a dozen churches in the community, a lot of the library system in Loudoun County, a lot of different private sector companies that are within Loudoun County, and just teach them just core principles of recognizing crisis and simple techniques and tricks of how to interact with someone in a crisis.
Wow, that's great. Well, I appreciate your leadership in all this. I mean, it's really come a long way, and a lot of it has to do with you and what you've been able to do with the program and engaging so many other entities there, outsiders, to see how they do it, what we do, what they do, how to really get ahead of the game on all these kinds of things. So hey, Sean, tell us a little bit about the co-responder model and where it started, where it's at now, and where you see it going.
Yeah, absolutely. So the co-responder model comes from the Marcus David Peters Act in 2020, where Richmond police interacted with an individual in crisis. Unfortunately, led to the taking of his life by Richmond police. So obviously that happens right there in the backyard of the General Assembly. They're reviewing the incident, and kind of their biggest question was, why do we continue to send law enforcement officers who are not mental health professionals, as we talked about earlier, to these situations? We as law enforcement, as you know, we tend to escalate things just by showing up. We show up in uniforms, we have badges and guns, and it can be intimidating to folks, and we tend to heighten things. And so the idea was, we need to figure out who to send to each type of call, and the best way to do that is to triage it. So the Marcus system in Virginia here has a 4-level triage. So whether you're calling 911 or 988, that dispatcher is going to label any mental health related call as a 1, 2, 3, or 4. A 1 is, I just want to talk to someone on the phone. 988 has call takers, professional mental health professionals that will handle that call. Level 2 is, okay, the phone call's not going to work for me. I need to talk to someone in person. But still no threats of violence or crime. So it's going to be a mobile crisis team that 988 will dispatch out to you anywhere in the state. And then 3 and 4, where law enforcement comes in, is when there is that safety risk, possible suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, things we can't just send, social workers or mental health professionals into. Our co-responder clinicians with MHSADS here in the county do have ballistic vests, but they don't have the training and the skills and the tools that we have when it comes to the tactical approach.
Sure.
And so with law enforcement, we will come to these situations, these level 3s and level 4s, render the scene safe, make sure everyone's cool, calm, collected. And then once we've done that, we pretty much are there for the little safety and security aspect. And then we bring our mental health professional into the situation. And so they're able to then do what they've spent hours upon hours, thousands of hours training to do, which is help people in crisis and navigate the waters of getting the help that they need.
Yeah, that's a great comprehensive approach. And I know, like you mentioned before about law enforcement is like the Swiss Army knife. We're always available 24/7, 365. And so we're always the first call to make. But the fact that we've been able to, develop a program that has all these aspects to it that really gets the right help out there to the people that need it the most at the right level, and that's really important, So I think this comprehensive approach is really a good way to go, and credit to you and the way that you've been able to move the program that we had in place early on into the direction it's going. Always looking ahead, always thinking about the best way to do things, getting input from other agencies, other professionals, just for everybody across the board. It really says a lot about you, our agency, our ability, and our desire to constantly look at the way to do things always better, always looking for the next best thing so that we don't get caught in the past and just start, living on our laurels, but always looking at, okay, how can we always improve what we're doing? So credit to you, the great work that you're doing. We really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I think the county does too. I think when you look at the amount of interactions that we have with the county, with our people here, and the low level of force, almost non-existent, that we ever have to engage with our citizens here, really really shows the level that we've gone to here to try to keep our citizens safe here. So Sean, I want to thank you for being here today. Great job. Keep up the great work. I appreciate all that you do, and I know the county does too. So thanks for being here, and keep it up. Okay?
Thanks, sir.
All right.